Nick and Jolie's union began 3 years ago, but the foundations of their marriage were far from genuine love or mutual respect. The truth is, Nick wouldn't have considered marrying her if not for the sudden twist of fate that left Jolie as the sole owner of her father's thriving business. Her father, Mr. Macmillan, a robust and seemingly invincible businessman, passed away unexpectedly due to a stroke. As his only child, Jolie inherited his substantial fortune, a windfall that Nick, a strikingly handsome yet idle man, couldn't ignore. He had always lived off the generosity of women, exploiting their kindness and resources to sustain his leisurely lifestyle. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. Jolie, overwhelmed by Nick's sweet promises and charming demeanor, couldn't see through his carefully constructed facade. Nick, on the other hand, saw this as a golden opportunity, planning to remain with Jolie until something more advantageous came along. However, he soon realized that Jolie herself was the jackpot he had been waiting for all his life. The magnitude of her inheritance was beyond his wildest dreams, and he knew exactly how to manipulate the situation to his benefit. Nick was confident he could exploit her profound affection to gain control over her vast fortune. Everything seemed to be falling perfectly into place for him. Jolie, in the depths of her grief over losing her father, the most important person in her life, found herself incredibly vulnerable. Nick took advantage of her fragile state, wrapping her in a cocoon of care and support during her darkest hours. He played the role of the devoted partner flawlessly, always there to lend a shoulder to cry on and offer words of comfort. Unbeknownst to her, Nick was using her sorrow to further conceal his true motives, at least until they were married. He maintained his facade of a loving and supportive partner, ensuring that Jolie was too invested to back out. Shortly after her father's funeral, Nick proposed, suggesting they wait to marry until her period of mourning had passed, all while meticulously planning his next steps to secure his place in her wealth. He knew that by the time the mourning period was over, Jolie would be so emotionally dependent on him that she wouldn't be able to see through his deceit. Jolie, blinded by grief and in desperate need of stability, accepted his proposal without hesitation. She saw Nick as her savior, the one person who had stood by her side during her most challenging times. She was unaware that Nick's true intentions were far from noble. He saw her vulnerability as a gateway to the life of luxury and ease he had always desired, fully intending to use her inherited wealth to his advantage. As the months passed, Nick continued to play his part perfectly. He was attentive and considerate, and always seemed to know exactly what Jolie needed. He became indispensable to her, and she couldn't imagine her life without him. Nick's manipulation was subtle yet effective. He slowly began to take control of her financial decisions, always under the guise of helping her manage her new responsibilities. Jolie, still reeling from her father's death, didn't question his involvement. She trusted him implicitly, never suspecting that his ultimate goal was to secure his financial future at her expense. Nick's plan was working seamlessly. He began to siphon off small amounts of money, ensuring that Jolie remained unaware. He invested in ventures that would benefit him personally, all while maintaining the illusion of a devoted husband. Jolie, consumed by her grief and her trust in Nick, remained oblivious to his deceit. She believed that their love was genuine and that Nick was the partner she had always dreamed of. But the truth was far more sinister. Nick's charm and attentiveness were nothing more than tools to secure his place in Jolie's life and her fortune. He saw her as a means to an end, a ticket to a life of opulence and ease. And as long as he could maintain his charade, he was determined to exploit her love and trust to the fullest extent. Jolie's tragedy had become Nick's triumph. Her father's sudden death had provided him with the perfect opportunity, and he had seized it without hesitation. As they moved forward together, Jolie remained blissfully unaware of the true nature of her husband's intentions, while Nick reveled in his success, always planning his next move to ensure that he remained in control of the vast wealth that had come into their lives. Nick was a master of deception, manipulation, and pretense. He had a chameleon-like ability to become whoever he needed to be, doing whatever was necessary to charm his wealthy girlfriends. Typically, he didn't exert much effort, confident that there would always be another affluent woman to exploit. However, with Jolie, the stakes were higher. Her name and wealth made every effort worthwhile, and Nick was keenly aware of this. But his first significant obstacle came from an unexpected source, one he hadn't anticipated. Jolie's father had a close friend, Mr. Chinland, who was not only his right-hand man in the company but also Jolie's godfather. Mr. Chinland immediately recognized that Jolie was infatuated with Nick and that her profound grief over her father's death made her yearn for a substitute father figure, hence her rush to marry. Being a shrewd and intelligent man, Mr. Chinland was adamant about a prenuptial agreement, and he skillfully persuaded Jolie of its necessity. "Nick, it's just for business." "Is it that difficult?" Jolie asked, echoing Mr. Chinland's advice. "This is insulting. Do you think I'm after your money?" Nick retorted, his indignation barely masking his frustration at this unexpected complication. "Money, it's a mere formality. It only matters if we get divorced. My godfather insists on it, and he's always been like a second father to me." Jolie, though naive about financial matters due to her sheltered upbringing, wasn't foolish in other respects. When she set her mind to something, she achieved it, no matter the obstacles. Nick found himself cornered and had no choice but to concede to all of Mr. Chinland's demands. The prenuptial agreement, standard in its formulation, severely restricted Nick's rights. It was clear that the business and all other property Jolie inherited from her father would never become joint marital assets. Nick had assumed he would gain a share in the dividends and acquire new properties and assets. However, the contract, drafted by a top-tier lawyer, effectively prevented him from accessing these opportunities. Despite this setback, Nick remained optimistic, believing that marriage to Jolie would still be beneficial. He anticipated accessing her finances unchecked, allowing him to build up his capital for the future. He planned to siphon money from their common budget daily, transferring it into his accounts. But here, too, Nick was mistaken. Mr. Chinland, a dedicated, decent, and responsible man, not only controlled Jolie's business finances but also oversaw her accounts. Nick found himself with limited funds for personal expenses, yet he remained hopeful, biding his time to see how the situation would evolve. Nick's patience eventually paid off. Jolie had been trying to conceive since their wedding day. She deeply desired to become a mother, but each new cycle brought only disappointment. Initially, she blamed it on the stress and nerves from the frantic pace of life. Taking over the business had been exhausting, requiring her to learn and adapt quickly. After more than a year of fruitless attempts, Jolie sought the help of specialists. A comprehensive medical examination finally revealed the cause of her infertility struggles. The diagnosis was a turning point. Jolie was devastated, her dreams of motherhood seemingly slipping away. In her vulnerable state, she leaned even more on Nick, who saw this as another opportunity to solidify his position. He offered her comfort and support, playing the role of the doting husband to perfection. But behind his facade of empathy and concern, Nick was calculating his next moves, always with his eyes on the ultimate prize: unfettered access to Jolie's wealth. As Jolie navigated her personal and professional challenges, Nick continued to plot and scheme, confident that he could eventually manipulate circumstances to his favor. Despite the prenuptial agreement and Mr. Chinland's vigilant oversight, Nick believed that his patience and cunning would ultimately secure the luxurious lifestyle he had always desired. Little did Jolie know that the man she trusted with her heart was merely a predator in disguise, biding his time until he could fully exploit her vulnerability and fortune. Jolie's symptoms, which she had initially brushed off as mere consequences of a hectic lifestyle, were serious warning signs. Her body was alerting her to severe issues, but she had ignored them for far too long. Finally, the doctors delivered the devastating news she had cancer. Despite undergoing nearly 2 years of grueling treatment and immense suffering, the prognosis remained grim. Throughout this harrowing period, Nick played the part of a supportive husband in name only. In truth, he wished for Jolie's demise, and his insincerity was becoming increasingly evident. Although they never confronted the issue, Jolie was painfully aware of the countless affairs her husband had engaged in. Nick, in his arrogance, believed he was masterfully deceiving everyone, maintaining the facade of a devoted husband to his dying wife. However, Nick's deceit did not go unnoticed. His despicable behavior was a topic of disdain among everyone, from the nurses who tended to Jolie in the hospitals to Mr. Chinland. The latter was furious and felt powerless. He couldn't understand why Jolie was so desperate to hold on to a marriage that was devoid of love and trust, especially as she faced the end of her life. His concerns were compounded by the fact that Jolie had no will in place. As things stood, Nick would automatically become her sole heir, inheriting everything she and her father had worked so hard for. Mr. Chinland was certain that Nick would squander the entire fortune within a few years. Yet he was at a loss about how to approach such a sensitive subject with his goddaughter, who had once been the picture of health and vitality but now had mere weeks to live. Nick, meanwhile, was already envisioning his windfall. His greedy anticipation grew daily, eager to be rid of his ailing wife and lay claim to her substantial wealth. He believed that everything was falling perfectly into place for him. However, Mr. Chinland prayed he wouldn't have to initiate the uncomfortable conversation about the will. Fortunately, that task fell out of his hands when Jolie herself broached the topic. What Jolie revealed left Mr. Chinland utterly speechless. She had orchestrated her plans with a meticulousness and ruthlessness that he had never anticipated. Her approach to revenge was truly masterful. She had played her cards with cold precision. Despite her physical decline, she had managed to achieve her primary goals. Jolie had secretly arranged everything. She had made legal provisions that ensured her wealth would be preserved and managed in a way that Nick could never touch it. Her plan was simple yet brilliant, ensuring that all of her father's hard work would not be in vain. She had created a trust that would control the business and her assets, with Mr. Chinland appointed as the trustee. This meant that upon her death, Nick would inherit nothing but the knowledge that he had been thoroughly outsmarted by the woman he had underestimated. In her final weeks, Jolie found a semblance of peace, knowing that her legacy was secured and that Nick's schemes had been thwarted. She had turned the tables on him in the most unexpected way, ensuring that her father's legacy and her life's work would continue to flourish without being tainted by Nick's greed. Mr. Chinland, filled with admiration and respect for Jolie, vowed to honor her wishes and protect her legacy. Jolie's meticulous planning not only safeguarded her fortune, but also served as a final, powerful statement of her strength and resilience. In the end, Nick was left with nothing but his shattered dreams and the bitter realization that he had been completely outplayed. Jolie's journey, though tragically cut short, concluded with her securing the future she had envisioned, free from the shadow of Nick's deceit. Her story became one of unexpected triumph, a testament to her enduring spirit and the poetic justice she achieved against the man who had sought to exploit her love and trust. Unfortunately, Jolie's loved ones did not witness a miracle, and she passed away without recovering. With meticulous care, she had arranged the details of her funeral, ensuring her final wishes were conveyed. The day after the farewell ceremony, the notary summoned those mentioned in Jolie's will to gather for its announcement. Nick was taken aback by this news. He had been certain that his wife hadn't drawn up any official documents for her death, believing he would become her sole heir by default. Despite his shock, he clung to a sliver of hope as he headed to the meeting, accompanied by his new mistress Shirley, a striking beauty. Upon entering the notary's office, Nick immediately noticed Mr. Chinland and Jolie's close friend Kurt Turgon. What truly startled him, however, was the sight of Kurt pushing a stroller with a baby boy inside. Nick did not know about Kurt's marriage or the birth of his child. While Nick was not known for his intellect, he was not entirely oblivious. It didn't take him long to suspect that there was a hidden agenda and that he had been outmaneuvered. Despite the sinking feeling in his gut, his curiosity compelled him to stay and discover what Jolie had planned, though he sensed it would be a profound embarrassment for him. For about 15 minutes, silence dominated the room as everyone took their places in different corners. No one else arrived, and the notary seemed to deliberately stretch out the introductory remarks, explaining the significance of the gathering and the honor of reading the deceased's last will. Even then, Nick could sense from Mr. Chinland's wicked grin that the contents of the will were known to everyone but him. Finally, Nick's name was called. "To my lawful husband Nick, I deny the inheritance," the notary read aloud. After this brief and pointed statement, the notary looked directly at Nick and asked if he understood the essence of what had been read. Humiliated and furious, Nick could only nod. At that moment, Shirley squeezed his hand and made a move to leave in a huff, but Nick held her back. She looked at him with confusion, but he ignored her gaze. Despite his desire to flee from the scene of his public disgrace, he knew the ordeal wasn't over and that he had to endure the rest of this humiliating spectacle. After a brief pause, the notary continued. "To Mr. Kurt Turgon, I leave the guardianship of my charitable foundation, ensuring the continued support of the causes closest to my heart." Kurt nodded solemnly, his eyes glistening with emotion. Nick's anger flared even hotter, knowing that someone he deemed unimportant had been entrusted with Jolie's philanthropic legacy. "And to Mr. Chinland, my godfather and loyal guardian, I leave the control of my business and all associated assets, ensuring the continuation of my father's legacy in the capable hands of someone I trust implicitly." Mr. Chinland remained calm, his expression one of satisfaction and resolution. Nick could barely contain his rage, feeling completely outmaneuvered and powerless. The final blow came when the notary revealed the last part of the will. "Finally, to my dear friends and the child of Kurt Turgon, I leave my estate and all its contents in the hope that it will provide a stable future for them, as they have provided me with unwavering support and love." Nick's world shattered. He had expected to inherit a fortune and live a life of luxury, but instead, he was left with nothing. His greed and deception had led him to this moment of ultimate defeat. As the notary concluded the reading, Nick felt every eye in the room on him. Shirley's questioning gaze turned to one of pity and contempt. The man who had come expecting to claim his wife's wealth was now exposed as a scoundrel with no stake in her legacy. Nick, feeling utterly defeated, finally rose to leave, dragging Shirley with him. Mr. Chinland and Kurt exchanged a knowing look, their expressions conveying a mix of relief and triumph. Jolie's meticulous planning ensured that her true loved ones were cared for and that Nick's treachery had not paid off. She had secured her legacy and exacted a measure of justice from beyond the grave, leaving Nick with nothing but the bitter taste of his failure. "I leave all my personal belongings to my only son, Robert Turgon. Until he reaches maturity, I appoint his father, Kurt Turgon, and Mr. Chinland as his guardians and managers of his estate." A bombshell revelation hit Nick like a sledgehammer. What? Kurt had a son? His patience shattered, and he erupted with a shocked scream. Besides Nick and Shirley, the news seemed to surprise no one else in the room. "Is the boy Jolie's biological child?" Nick gasped, his voice rising in disbelief. "Yes, Robert is the biological son of Jolie and Kurt," confirmed Mr. Chinland. She hasn't been pregnant in the last 2 years. That's impossible. Nick clung to the hope of impossibility, even though he knew that modern technology made pregnancy unnecessary for childbirth. The godfather smirked, taking obvious pleasure in Nick's astonishment and dismay. "Medical advancements today are truly remarkable," he remarked with a hint of smugness. Witnessing the scene unfold, Kurt recalled the terror he felt 2 years ago upon learning that his best friend was gravely ill with little hope of recovery. It shocked him how calmly she spoke about her limited time and the steps she needed to take. That was when she confided in him her profound desire to become a mother, no matter what. "I had my eggs frozen before starting treatment. They told me I likely wouldn't be able to raise my child, but I insisted. Kurt, I grew up without a mother, and I know how hard it is, but I always felt her love and protection. Does Nick agree to raise the child alone?" Kurt cautiously questioned. Who would allow him? He would happily become a guardian just to use the baby's money because he has no conscience. "No, I've already realized that my dear husband is a man of dubious character, to say the least. His reaction to my diagnosis and prognosis. I can't even bring myself to speak about it. This man isn't worth my distress." "And what about the baby?" Kurt hesitated, which was uncharacteristic of her, as she was usually fearless. "I don't know how to ask this delicately. Maybe there isn't a delicate way. In short, I want you to be the father of my child," she declared, her voice rising in pitch. "Are you serious? You have a husband?" Kurt was unprepared for this revelation. "Yes, I do have a husband, and he will remain my husband until the day I die. I've already made that decision. Kurt, of course we won't sleep together. It's impossible given my current condition. I can't carry the baby myself. I had my eggs frozen. Now, we need the biological material from the future father. Naturally, I also need a surrogate to carry and give birth to the baby, but thankfully such services are available now." This heartfelt and emotionally charged request left Kurt stunned, grappling with the enormity of the situation and the depth of his friend's determination and love. Initially, Kurt thought it was ludicrous, the frantic musings of a desperate woman, but soon he realized she had a meticulously detailed plan. Jolie had researched the legalities, arranged services at a reproductive clinic, and even found a surrogate mother for the future child. "Kurt, I could use a donor for the baby's father. I desperately want to leave a piece of myself behind. But when I pondered deeply, you were the only person I could trust implicitly. I am certain of you, after knowing you for so many years. I believe you will be a wonderful father. I understand that you want to build your own family, marry, and have children. Naturally, it's logical. But please think about it. Don't answer me right now. After my experience with Nick, the father of my child must be someone who doesn't prioritize money, someone who won't exploit my assets. I'm not as naive as I was before marriage. Nick taught me a lot. Now, with all this life experience, I see that you don't need any money at all. You have plenty." "My father has," Kurt interjected, gently correcting her. "You know you'll inherit it. You worked tirelessly to keep the family company flourishing. You've never been in need. Now, I know for a fact that a man who grew up poor will always worry about having enough to eat. And if his integrity is also lacking, there will be a big problem. I have experienced that firsthand," she added sadly. "To be honest, I'm utterly confused. I envision becoming a father in an entirely different way. I need to consult my parents. Understand that I can't make such a monumental decision alone. I will need my family's support when I become a father, so I have to inform them and ask for their opinion." Jolie had no objection but requested that Kurt promise to keep the information confidential. The conversation with Kurt's parents was incredibly challenging. His father received the news with a neutral demeanor, listened to all the explanations, and assured Kurt of his support, promising to help with his grandchild as much as he could. His mother, however, struggled to accept the situation. Like all mothers, she envisioned her son marrying a good woman and having children together. She felt deep sympathy for Jolie, whom she had known since childhood and thought highly of. But this request was a bitter pill to swallow, knowing that her potential grandchild's mother was dying and that the child would be carried by another woman. Kurt's heart ached with the weight of the decision. He saw the profound sadness and determination in Jolie's eyes. She wanted to ensure her child would be loved and cared for, and she saw Kurt as the embodiment of those assurances. The idea of raising a child born from such an extraordinary set of circumstances was daunting, yet it also stirred a deep sense of purpose within him. He realized that this decision was about more than just him. It was about honoring the love and trust Jolie had in him and stepping up to a role that would shape a young life profoundly. Days turned into nights as Kurt wrestled with his thoughts. His parents' mixed reactions left him more conflicted, but the unwavering support from his father provided a beacon of hope. He knew that taking on this responsibility meant sacrifices and challenges, but it also meant creating a legacy of love and resilience. Jolie's plea was not just a request, it was a testament to their unbreakable bond and the faith she had in him. As he looked at Jolie, he felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just about becoming a father, it was about fulfilling a promise to a dear friend and embracing a journey that would define the rest of his life. Can't the child inherit the disease? The woman dreaded asking this question, feeling it was dreadful, awkward, and inappropriate. Yet, how else could she ensure her grandson's safety? Jolie does not have a hereditary form of the disease, Kurt replied. This reassured the anxious woman somewhat, though not entirely. Nevertheless, after careful consideration, she expressed her support for her son's decision. Kurt himself wrestled with indecision. Jolie's proposal had caught him off guard, but after a period of contemplation, he concluded there was no reason to refuse. When he conveyed his approval to Jolie, she was overjoyed, and they began implementing her plan step by step. As Kurt sat reflecting on the life-altering decision, Mr. Chinlund recalled his conversation with Jolie just over 2 months ago. She had approached him cautiously, expressing her deep respect for him as a second father and hoping he wouldn't refuse her request. Then, she revealed her desire for him to become her son's guardian. Initially, Mr. Chinlund thought his goddaughter was delusional, but as Jolie shared the full story, he was left in shock. Not only had Jolie and Kurt made such a bold decision, but they had also kept it hidden for so long. "How old is the baby now, Mr. Chinlund asked. "Robert is 8 months old," Jolie responded with a smile. "You both truly know how to surprise Mr. Chinlund remarked, still processing the shock. "I don't want Nick to find out about the child before I die. He will only find out when my will is announced. I've already had it drafted, and it's held with the notary. However, there's one aspect that still needs to be resolved. Robert will have only one parent. I've reassessed many aspects of my life, and I don't want to leave anything to chance. Kurt has parents, so if anything were to happen to him, Robert would go to them. But I want you to have rights too, just in case." Being perceptive, the elderly man sensed that it could be too risky to act against Nick, even though Jolie's husband fully deserved such treatment. "Jolie, are you certain this is the way to handle your husband? He's a repugnant man, and involving yourself with him means. I mean, why seek such vengeance from beyond the grave?" He expressed his thoughts, and then immediately apologized. "Sorry, dear, for being so blunt." Jolie looked at him with weary eyes, her strength waning but her resolve unwavering. "Mr. Chinlund, it's not about vengeance. It's about ensuring my son is safe and cared for. Nick has proven himself unworthy of trust, and I can't risk Robert's future. You have always been like a father to me, and I know you will protect him." The elderly man sighed, understanding the depth of her concerns. "I will do everything in my power to ensure Robert is safe and loved," he promised, feeling the weight of this new responsibility. Meanwhile, Kurt was grappling with his own emotions. The enormity of Jolie's request was overwhelming, but her trust in him gave him a sense of purpose. He knew that stepping into this role was about more than just honoring Jolie's wishes. It was about providing a future for Robert that was filled with love and security. The days that followed were filled with plans and preparations, each step reinforcing the bond between Kurt and the little boy who had already captured his heart. As they navigated this complex situation, both Kurt and Mr. Chinlund found themselves reflecting on the profound impact Jolie had on their lives. Her determination, courage, and unwavering love for her son left an indelible mark on their hearts. They knew that honoring her legacy meant embracing this unexpected journey with open hearts and steadfast resolve. You know, I've pondered this for 2 long years. I was there for Robert's birth, and I've seen firsthand how Kurt adores him and how his parents cherish him. I need nothing more. I've come to terms with this reality, right now. What frustrates me the most are those people who come to me with false hopes of some mystical recovery or miraculous healing. As for Nick, I once loved him so deeply and trusted him with all my heart, but he turned out to be the most ungrateful, heartless beast. He visits me in the hospital as if it's a grueling chore. Do you know his girlfriends have accompanied him here? The elderly man silently nodded, the bitterness evident in his expression. And I'm supposed to just forget all this? Not. He worships money above everything else, so that's how I will punish him. It will be a shock for him. I've kept all of this from you because it was incredibly difficult. I wanted to introduce you to my son right away. But I was so cautious to ensure that no one accidentally let it slip and told Nick. This might be my final farewell to him. I even wrote him a letter. The notary will deliver it. Mr. Chinlund had made several attempts to dissuade his goddaughter, feeling that her plan might be too harsh and ill-conceived. However, she remained resolute in her decision, and he had no choice but to accept it. After all, it was her final wish, and it deserved to be respected. In the sudden silence of the notary's office, everyone was lost in their thoughts. Of course, it didn't take a fortune teller to guess that Nick was cursing Jolie in every conceivable way. People like him rarely reflect on their faults, failing to see how their actions could lead to such a logical response from others. Such introspection was beyond him. Why bother looking inward when blaming others was so much easier? Unexpectedly, it was Shirley who broke the heavy silence. She tried to gently take Nick by the elbow to lead him out. However, Nick was far from ready to leave, still brimming with indignation. Are you seriously telling me I'm not entitled to anything at all? A mandatory share or whatever it's called? I am the husband, after all, he shrieked, his voice grating against the tension in the room. Even Shirley winced at his outburst, feeling the sting of his public humiliation. The others present were equally discomforted, though the elderly notary, well-versed in handling such dramatic scenes, remained unfazed. According to the will, you are not included in the circle of persons entitled to a mandatory share in the inheritance. Furthermore, the notary said, patting the thick folder in front of him, I have meticulously reviewed your marriage contract. Its text is attached here, and you have no grounds for a claim, even if you decide to appeal to the courts. Naturally, you retain the right to do so, but I must warn you. The odds are not in your favor. Of course, I will dispute it. It's unclear who this illegitimate child even is. Nick continued, his voice dripping with contempt. Jolie's eyes flared with a mixture of sorrow and resolve. She had anticipated this reaction, yet it still hurt deeply to witness Nick's blatant disregard for her final wishes. She had loved him once, truly and deeply, but his greed and selfishness had eroded every ounce of respect she once had for him. Nick, this isn't about you, Jolie finally spoke, her voice firm but weary. This is about ensuring my son's future. I trusted you once, and you betrayed that trust in the worst possible ways. Robert deserves better. He deserves a father who will love him unconditionally, not one who sees him as a means to an end." Nick opened his mouth to retort, but the notary raised a hand to silence him. "This discussion is over," the notary said sternly. "The will is clear, and its terms will be enforced. You are free to seek legal counsel, but I assure you, it will be in vain." Shirley, seeing the futility of Nick's anger, tugged at his arm once more, this time with more insistence. "Nick, let's go," she whispered urgently. "There's nothing more to be done here." As they left the office, the heavy atmosphere began to lighten, though the emotional weight of the revelations lingered. Kurt and Mr. Chinland exchanged glances, both feeling the profound responsibility that had been placed upon them. Kurt thought back to the times he had spent with Robert, the joy and innocence in the boy's eyes. He knew that raising Robert would be a challenge, but it was one he was ready to embrace. For Jolie, for Robert, and for the memory of a friendship that had weathered so many storms. Mr. Chinland, too, felt the gravity of the promise he had made to Jolie. He had always seen her as a daughter, and now he was committed to ensuring that her final wishes were honored. He would protect Robert as his own, guided by the love and respect he had always held for Jolie. As they sat in the quiet office, the weight of their new responsibilities settling over them, both men knew that the road ahead would not be easy. But they were prepared to face whatever challenges came their way, driven by the love and loyalty that Jolie had inspired in them. They would ensure that Robert grew up surrounded by love, protected from the greed and selfishness that had marred his mother's life. And in doing so, they would honor Jolie's legacy, carrying forward the strength and courage she had shown in her final days. The reality of the situation was sinking in, and Nick went on a tirade, oblivious to the absurdity of his words. Kurt struggled to restrain himself from punching the arrogant man, while even the usually composed Mr. Chinland flushed with anger. Only the notary remained calm, as if this were just another ordinary workday, nothing surprising or unusual. The notary responded coolly. "Attached here are not only the child's birth certificate, but also medical documents providing clear answers about his birth. Furthermore, as per the deceased's request, there is a DNA examination result confirming that your wife is the biological mother of Robert Turgan. I should inform you that all documents have been gathered completely and thoroughly." "Can I see?" Nick demanded, desperate for the evidence. "No. You can only review the part that pertains to you. All other documents, especially those regarding a child, can only be disclosed with the parent's consent." "Of course I do not permit it," Kurt immediately interjected. "So it's possible only in a court proceeding if the court deems it necessary to demand these documents." This was the final straw for Nick. He stormed out of the office, slamming the door behind him and vowing not to let this matter rest. His mistress, however, was more polite. She said goodbye and left quietly, closing the door behind her. "Does it matter that he didn't sign? That the will was read to him, Mr. Chinland?" asked the notary. "There are many like him. It's nothing more than a formality," the notary reassured him. "It would be funny if it weren't so sad. I still don't understand how Jolie got involved with him, Mr. Chinland said, his thoughts aloud, but his question remained rhetorical. The men quickly signed the necessary documents and shook hands. Mr. Chinland helped Kurt put little Robert into the stroller. "Will you join us? I want to take a walk and get some fresh air. And it's good for the baby," Kurt asked. "Certainly, I'll join." For a while they walked in silence, listening to the rustle of the stroller wheels. "Do you think Jolie would be satisfied with how I'm coping?" Kurt finally asked the question that had been bothering him. "I'm sure of it. You're a wonderful father, and it's clear to see how much you both mean to each other," Jolie's godfather reassured him. "To be honest, there's one thing I can't get out of my head. You know, I think Jolie told you that I advised her against what just happened at the notary's office. Are you talking about this circus with the will and how Nick found out about Robert Mister. Chinlund nodded in response. Yes, I feared that exposing everything this way would provoke Nick. I wanted to handle it more delicately. To avoid this confrontation, Kurt explained, his voice tinged with regret. Mister. Chinlund sighed deeply. I understand your concerns, Kurt. But Jolie was determined to protect Robert and ensure that Nick had no claim over him. She wanted everything to be crystal clear and legally binding, no matter the consequences. Kurt nodded, still troubled. I just wish there had been another way. A less painful way for everyone involved. I know, Kurt. But sometimes the most difficult decisions are the ones that must be made to secure the future. Jolie knew what she was doing, and she trusted you to carry out her wishes. As they continued their walk, the tension slowly eased, replaced by a shared sense of duty and love for Robert. The fresh air and the quiet rustle of the stroller wheels provided a brief respite from the emotional storm they had just weathered. Jolie's strength always amazed me, Kurt said, breaking the silence. Even in her final days, she was thinking ahead, planning every detail to protect her son. She was remarkable, Mister. Chinlund agreed. And she saw that same strength in you. She knew you would be the father Robert needed. Kurt looked down at Robert, who was peacefully dozing in the stroller. I'll do everything I can to honor her trust. I promise. I have no doubt you will, Mister. Chinlund replied, placing a comforting hand on Kurt's shoulder. As they walked on, the bond between them grew stronger, united by their love for Jolie and their commitment to Robert's future. They knew the road ahead would be challenging, but they were prepared to face it together, fortified by the legacy of a remarkable woman whose love and determination would guide them every step of the way. Of course, Kurt replied. I was the one who constantly brought up the conversation about that. I didn't like this idea from the very beginning. He's a nasty type, angry, stupid, and mercenary. Why provoke him, honestly? I even contemplated telling him when the baby was already born that Jolie was hiding it so much. I believed I had no right to. I decided that she just didn't want to deal with him herself and left these disputes to us. Today, I saw him with that woman, showing no shame at all. Now I question whether I did the right thing by not insisting on my stance. His reaction, the expression on his face, was horrifying. It would have been better to get rid of him earlier. I think Jolie didn't want to either. That played a part too. And revenge. She wanted revenge because she loved. Regardless of what she said later, she loved intensely, and this corrupted love found no other way out. My poor girl. The elderly man wiped a tear trickling down his cheek. Don't grieve for her, she asked us not to. She asked us to direct all our love, which was for her, to Robbie. Kurt comforted Jolie's godfather. While the men reminisced, Nick and Shirley watched from the car, discussing the same topic. So, you won't get anything at all, right? Shirley asked in disbelief, blinking rapidly. You're such a fool. You've heard that there are no chances because of this finding. Okay, let's go. We need to take at least something valuable and move it to my apartment. 3 days later, Kurt finally mustered the courage to visit Jolie's house, only to find it empty. He had braced himself for a confrontation and even brought 2 security guards for his protection. But Nick had already been there and cleaned the place out, taking anything of value. Now Nick was sitting alone in the small kitchen of his tiny apartment, nursing a bit of whiskey Shirley had left him, which was quite expected. Why would she need a beggar man? As Nick pondered his current situation, he couldn't help but reflect on how he had ended up here. Before, women used to pay him to be with him, but now he needed to offer money to a young, beautiful girl to stay in her company. Ironically, Nick, a gigolo past his prime who deteriorated due to his vices, didn't blame himself or his circumstances. In his thoughts, his wife was the villain who had drained his vitality and dashed his hopes. Left without an inheritance, he was so looking forward to the money. In his fantasies, he was young, handsome, successful, and extremely wealthy. But as a parting shot, Shirley had told him some harsh truths. No one needed him. He was just a poor drunkard living in delusions of grandeur. It was very difficult to come to terms with that reality. His dreams of wealth and success, largely contingent on his ex-wife, crumbled like a house of cards. His aspirations to be a successful businessman were dashed. Blinded by his ego, he failed to see his part in his downfall. Instead, he blamed his deceased wife, who he saw as the root of all his problems. Nick's thoughts spiraled as he sipped his drink. He remembered how he used to be the center of attention, with women flocking to him and opportunities seemingly endless. His current reality was a stark contrast: a dingy apartment, no money, and no prospects. He felt an overwhelming sense of loss, not just of material wealth, but of the life he once knew. As he sat there, the weight of his failures pressed down on him. He had squandered so many chances and pushed away people who cared, and now he was alone. The bitterness he felt towards Jolie was a mask for the deeper regret and self-loathing that festered within him. He had built his life on superficial charm and deceit, and now it had all come crashing down. Meanwhile, Kurt and Mr. Chinland continued their walk, lost in their thoughts. Kurt was haunted by the idea that perhaps he should have insisted on handling things differently, that maybe he could have prevented the chaos that had unfolded. But deep down, he knew that Jolie's wishes were clear, and he had honored them to the best of his ability. "You're doing everything right, Kurt, Mr. Chinland said, sensing Kurt's inner turmoil. "Jolie trusted you because she knew you would put Robert first. You have nothing to feel guilty about." Kurt nodded, though the doubts lingered. "I just wish it hadn't come to this. I wish there had been a way to avoid all this pain." "Sometimes, life doesn't give us easy choices, Mr. Chinland replied. "But you are doing the best you can, and that's all anyone can ask." As they walked on, the city around them continued its bustling pace, oblivious to the small, quiet dramas unfolding in its midst. Kurt knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he also knew that he was not alone. With Mr. Chinland's support and the memory of Jolie's unwavering love guiding him, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. They reached a park and sat on a bench, watching Robert as he played on the grass. The simple joy of the child was a balm for their weary hearts, a reminder that despite the turmoil, life went on. "Look at him," Kurt said softly. "So full of life and innocence. Jolie would be proud." "She would, Mr. Chinland agreed. "And she would be grateful to you for being the father he needs." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the park, they sat in companionable silence, each lost in their thoughts, but united by their love for the little boy who had brought them together. The road ahead might be fraught with challenges, but they were ready to face it, strengthened by the bonds of family and the enduring power of love. Nick spent nearly 2 weeks in a drunken stupor, desperately seeking escape from the crushing reality and his growing resentment. Each day, his anger and bitterness intensified. One particularly bleak, hangover-filled morning, Nick decided he'd had enough. He realized that drowning in alcohol wouldn't bring him success or the revenge he craved on Jolie. He felt deeply humiliated, especially after a recent encounter with men sent by Mr. Chinland, who had practically forced him to hand over his car keys and had torn up the power of attorney Jolie had given him. "Didn't you know the power of attorney loses its legal force after the death of the person who issued it?" one of the men had said, his tone dripping with disdain. In Nick's distorted mind, he saw himself as a saint who had never left his sick wife's side, conveniently ignoring his endless intrigues, gambling, alcohol abuse, and dismissive behavior toward Jolie. "What a pity that she's dead and I can't hit her," he thought repeatedly. I barely restrained my impulse, encouraging myself that my patience would be generously rewarded. He began to ponder his revenge, initially contemplating desecrating her grave. But as he thought more about what was dear to Jolie and what would cause her the most suffering, a sinister idea struck him like a bolt of electricity. Robert. Nick laughed viciously as the plan formed in his mind. Of course, many details needed to be resolved, but the core of his scheme was clear. He wouldn't harm Robert physically. Instead, he would orchestrate a nightmare for any loving mother being unable to help her child in trouble. His plan was simple and chilling: kidnap Robert, take him far away, and abandon him at an orphanage. For the next week, thoughts of revenge and fantasies of it warmed Nick's darkened soul. He hadn't smiled like that in a long time, though the grimace looked more terrifying than joyful. He relished the euphoria of imagining Jolie's torment as she helplessly watched from the afterlife. Once he had settled on the theoretical aspects of his plan, he began to focus on the practical side. Nick needed to gather information about Robert's movements and those who cared for him. He knew Kurt well from their past and was familiar with Kurt's parents, having visited their house. He also knew that their elite suburban settlement had enhanced security. As he began to contemplate his plan, he realized the challenges ahead. He couldn't predict how long he'd need to observe from the forest with binoculars, studying the child's daily routine and movements. Is the game worth the candle? Nick reasoned with himself. His mental state had noticeably deteriorated since the announcement of the will. She ruined my life, and I will ruin the life of her child. A rich heir, he will live off the state's readiness, and his mother will watch from the other world, realizing she is to blame for everything. He laughed maliciously. If an indifferent person had been near Nick at that moment, they would have noticed the drastic changes in his mind and taken him to a doctor. Unfortunately, history doesn't entertain hypotheticals. Nick was relentless when he set his mind to something. No matter how foolish the idea seemed, he saw it through to the end. He spent 2 full days preparing the necessary conditions, scouting the entire territory to find the perfect vantage point. He needed a spot that overlooked the entire settlement, especially the Turgon house, while remaining hidden. He devoted all his effort and time to finding a place that he deemed perfect in every aspect. For over a week, Nick rose at dawn and hurried to the cottage settlement, remaining there until late evening. He kept a constant watch with binoculars, recording every activity in the house, who arrived, and when they departed. He diligently maintained a notebook to ensure he didn't miss anything. He discovered that Robert was cared for by Kurt, his grandmother, and a nanny. Of course, Kurt and his mother were unsuitable for Nick's plan. They knew him well and could identify him immediately. Nick had no intention of being caught for the crime he was plotting. He anticipated the police would come to him with questions, but he hoped to deflect suspicion. Therefore, he chose the nanny as the target for his attack. She had a fixed schedule and always walked with Robert in the same locations along the same routes. Nick's meticulous observation confirmed the nanny's routine, and he began to plan the specifics of the kidnapping. He knew he would have to act quickly and decisively, ensuring there were no witnesses who could connect him to the crime. As he meticulously planned each step, the anticipation of executing his revenge filled him with a twisted sense of satisfaction. As the days passed, Nick's obsession with his plan grew. He envisioned every detail, from the moment he would grab Robert to the child's eventual placement in an orphanage far from anyone who knew him. The idea of Jolie's spirit watching helplessly, tormented by her inability to save her son, fueled his resolve. Finally, the day arrived. Nick had everything in place. He had scouted the area, memorized the nanny's schedule, and chosen the perfect moment to strike. He waited in his hidden spot, his heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. He knew this was his chance to exact the ultimate revenge on Jolie. As the nanny appeared with Robert in the stroller, Nick's pulse quickened. He watched them approach, his mind racing with the final steps of his plan. When they reached the secluded part of the path, Nick sprang into action. He moved swiftly and silently, grabbing the stroller and pushing the nanny aside. The look of shock and fear on her face gave him a perverse thrill. Before she could react, Nick had disappeared into the woods with Robert. He ran through the trees, clutching the baby tightly, knowing he had to move quickly to avoid detection. He reached his car, hidden nearby, and secured Robert in the back seat. With one last glance at the settlement, Nick drove away, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. As he sped down the highway, Nick felt a strange calm wash over him. He had done it. He had taken the ultimate revenge on Jolie, ensuring she would suffer even in death. He glanced at Robert in the rearview mirror, the child's innocent face unaware of the darkness surrounding him. Nick's plan was far from over. He still had to find the perfect orphanage, far from anyone who might recognize Robert or connect him to Kurt. But as he drove, his mind was already racing with the next steps. He had crossed a line, and there was no turning back. In his twisted mind, Nick believed he had finally won. He had struck back at Jolie in the most painful way possible. As the miles passed, his thoughts were consumed by the image of her despair, the ultimate victory in his deranged quest for vengeance. Fortune favored Nick on a Wednesday. During her usual daytime walk with the peacefully sleeping baby, the nanny left the secured territory of the settlement. She followed a small forest path to a clearing where she met another nanny from a nearby settlement. They chatted and laughed, unaware of the danger lurking. Nick decided to stop watching the settlement daily to avoid drawing attention. He needed to remain inconspicuous. Now he only visited on Wednesdays, trying to coincide with the nanny's daytime walk. Everything was precise, like clockwork. Each Wednesday, the nanny would leave the safety of the settlement and walk the forest path. For 4 consecutive Wednesdays, he observed the pattern to ensure it did not fail. On the 4th Wednesday, he knew he would return the next week at the same time to execute his plan. To carry out his scheme, he purchased a powerful stun gun from a local market, paying cash to avoid being traced. He meticulously planned every detail to avoid capture. Similarly, he bought an old car, stole license plates, and attached them to the vehicle. He strategically determined where to park the car so it was close enough to escape but not so near as to attract attention. He also considered his appearance, taking steps to disguise his figure and face to avoid recognition. Thoughts of kidnapping consumed him. He went to sleep and woke up with these thoughts, even dreaming about the act in precise detail. As the appointed day approached, he lost nearly 7 kilos and became a mere shadow of his former self. A glance at him was enough to realize this was a man to be feared. Traces of neurosis and obsession began to etch themselves onto his face. On Wednesday, he parked in a pre-selected spot and waited. As he saw the nanny pushing the stroller down the path, he trembled. The extensive planning had disconnected him from the reality of his impending actions. He was about to confront a stranger, assault her with a stun gun, snatch the child from the stroller, and flee to his car. Nick had imagined the situation differently, more like a scene from a video game. However, the reality was stark: the woman, the baby in the stroller, the baby's curious gaze. By nature, Nick was not violent, and crossing that line was difficult for him. But his deep-seated hatred for Jolie drove him to carry out his plan. He approached the boy's nanny, pushed her away from the stroller, and knocked her down. He then used a taser on her, and she passed out from the shock. All that was left was to take the child out of the stroller and run to the car. However, things went awry at this point. He bent down to unfasten the belts, and suddenly he felt a blow to his head and fell to the ground. The next thing he knew, an elderly man was standing over him, scolding Nick and tying his hands. Nick lost consciousness again. The mysterious man turned out to be a gamekeeper who was well known in 2 nearby elite communities. His guardhouse was practically in the middle, just beyond a clearing where nannies from the neighboring settlements often gathered. His dwelling was concealed behind dense greenery and went unnoticed by Nick. That day, Mr. Mayo had been returning from the local store when he noticed suspicious activity. He later explained to the police officer, "I saw someone standing guard, dressed entirely in black despite the morning heat. I decided to watch a little and investigate, due to his many years as a gamekeeper." Mr. Mayo was adept at moving silently through the forest to avoid alarming the wildlife. "I hid behind a tree and kept a watchful eye. Suddenly I saw a man attack a woman, knocking her down. I initially thought that he intended to assault her, but he was trying to reach the child. I rushed over and hit him with a stick I had picked up just in case, Mr. Mayo explained. "Good job, Mr. Mayo. You've become a local hero. Look, the press is already gathering. They want to interview you. Sign this police report and bask in your newfound fame," said one of the officers. "No, I won't go to them. I don't care for that sort of thing," replied the gamekeeper and quietly walked back to his place in a roundabout way so that no one would follow. Mr. Mayo didn't feel he had done anything extraordinary. He believed anyone would have acted similarly in his position. How could he not assist when those who couldn't defend themselves were in danger? A few hours later, Kurt appeared at Mr. Mayo's house. "Hello, I am the father of the boy you rescued today. He's a good kid. He calmed down as soon as I picked him up. Such a brave and intelligent-looking boy. Thank you so much. It's a blessing you were there at the time. We're so grateful you didn't just pass by." Kurt was on the verge of tears, overwhelmed with emotions. The day had been incredibly intense, leaving him emotionally shaken. "Tell me, how can I thank you?" Mr. Mayo smiled warmly, shaking his head. "There's no need to thank me. I just did what anyone would do. I'm just glad the boy is safe and sound." Kurt insisted, "Please, let us do something for you. Anything you need, don't hesitate to ask." The gamekeeper finally relented, seeing the sincerity in Kurt's eyes. "If you must, then perhaps you can help with a donation to the local wildlife sanctuary. It's a cause close to my heart, and it could use the support." Kurt nodded eagerly. "Consider it done. We'll make a generous donation in your name." As they parted ways, Kurt couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude. Mr. Mayo had not only saved Robert, but had also restored some of his faith in humanity. The kindness of a stranger had made all the difference on a day that could have ended in tragedy. Meanwhile, Nick was taken into police custody, facing a slew of charges. His plans for revenge had backfired spectacularly, leaving him with nothing but the consequences of his actions. As he sat in the holding cell, he was forced to confront the reality of his situation. His dreams of wealth and power were shattered, replaced by the cold, hard truth of his downfall. Kurt, on the other hand, returned home with Robert, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He had been given a second chance to protect and raise his son, and he vowed to make the most of it. The ordeal had brought him closer to Robert, reinforcing the bond between them. As they settled back into their routine, Kurt couldn't help but think of Jolie and the sacrifices she had made. He knew she was watching over them, guiding them with her love and strength. And with the support of friends like Mr. Mayo, he felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the days that followed, the community rallied around Kurt and Robert, offering their support and solidarity. The story of Mr. Mayo's heroism spread, inspiring others to look out for one another and to stand up against those who sought to harm. It was a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of the human spirit. For Kurt and Robert, life went on. They cherished the moments of peace and happiness, knowing that they had been given a precious gift. As they walked through the forest paths, hand in hand, they felt the presence of Jolie, guiding them with her unwavering love. "What are you talking about?" "There's no need to thank me. Who keeps score when a child's life hangs in the balance, Mr. Mayo was genuinely surprised to be thanked for his actions. Nevertheless, Kurt persisted. "Well, if you insist, a new hunting suit and maybe some food for my dog would be appreciated." "Of course, no problem. By the way, if you don't mind me asking, was all this done for money?" asked a curious gamekeeper. "Oh, sadly, it's much more complicated than that," replied Kurt. "Well, feel free to share if it's not too much trouble. I live somewhat isolated here, in an information vacuum, so to speak." Kurt began to recount the disjointed events of their past years, including Jolly's illness, their unconventional parenting decision, her subsequent death, and the ensuing revenge against her husband. The investigator informed me that Nick was deeply hurt, as everyone assumed his actions were solely driven by greed. He was consumed by revenge, Kurt explained. He was relieved that Mr. Mayo had inquired about this complex story. He had been eager to share it with someone, seeking an unbiased perspective from an outsider. He questioned if they had driven Nick into a state of madness and revenge. If it were just about himself, Kurt wouldn't suffer so much reflexivity. But everything he and Jolie did went back to their boy. After concluding his story, Kurt turned to Mr. Mayo, an impartial observer, and asked, "Do you think we pushed him to this point? Are we responsible for his entire desire for revenge?" "Oh boy, are you serious? You're an adult and you're talking such nonsense. That Nick of yours always found a reason he doesn't even need one. He married for money, cheated shamelessly, mistreated his sick wife, and convinced himself it was all her fault. What's her fault? For retaliating once? For losing patience? For not enduring it? Oh, she hit the most painful thing for him, the wallet. On the contrary, well done. The woman has thought up such a plan and put it into practice." This harsh truth from a strange man's perspective truly uplifted Kurt. He deeply pondered every word Mr. Mayo had said. "Now I also owe you for your good advice," Kurt smiled in response. The gamekeeper merely waved his hand at him. They parted as friends, and Mr. Mayo promised to check in on the boy. "I heard somewhere that the Chinese have this belief or wisdom, God knows what to call it, that if you save someone's life, you're responsible for that person forever. So don't worry about your Robert. I'll look after him here too," the gamekeeper said as a farewell. True to his word, he regularly visited Kurt's house and was always a welcome guest. In him, the boy found another loving family member. The court sentenced Nick to several years of imprisonment. During this lengthy period, everyone in the house managed to calm down and return to their usual quiet life. The family could finally breathe a sigh of relief. Mr. Chinlin regularly visited and babysat the boy, diligently fulfilling the duties assigned to him by his goddaughter. Kurt met a single mom whose daughter attended the same kindergarten group as Robert. The children got along well, and Kurt's parents hoped that this time their son's personal life would flourish and Robert would have a loving stepmother and sister, perhaps even more than one sister. But of course, as Kurt promised Jolie, he would never allow Robert to forget his mother. He always talked about her, showing the boy pictures and videos. He constantly reminded him that his mother loved him very much, and she was always with him, protecting and watching over him, even if he couldn't see her. Over time, Kurt and the single mom, Emily, grew closer. She was kind and understanding, with a warm heart that made Robert feel safe and loved. Her daughter, Lily, quickly became Robert's best friend, and the two were inseparable. Kurt's parents adored Emily and Lily, seeing the potential for a happy, blended family. As months passed, Kurt and Emily's relationship blossomed. They supported each other through the challenges of single parenthood, creating a nurturing environment for their children. Kurt's parents were thrilled to see their son finding happiness again, and they embraced Emily and Lily as part of the family. Emily was sensitive to Robert's feelings about his mother. She encouraged Kurt to keep Jolie's memory alive and often joined in sharing stories and looking at photos. She understood the importance of honoring Jolie's place in Robert's heart, and this strengthened the bond between them all. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Robert climbed into Kurt's lap, holding a photo of Jolie. "Daddy, tell me about Mommy again," he asked, his eyes full of curiosity and love. Kurt smiled and kissed his son's forehead. "Your mommy was the bravest, kindest person I've ever known. She loved you more than anything in the world. She fought hard to bring you into this world and make sure you were safe and loved." Emily and Lily listened quietly, their presence a comforting support. Kurt continued, "She may not be here with us physically, but she is always watching over you, protecting you, and loving you from heaven. And every time you feel happy or loved, that's her way of being with you." Robert nodded, holding the photo close. "I love you, Mommy," he whispered. Kurt hugged his son tightly, feeling a deep sense of peace. Despite all the hardships, they had found a way to create a loving, supportive family. Emily smiled, tears in her eyes, and reached out to hold Kurt's hand. They were in this together, building a future filled with love and memories of Jolie. As the years went by, their family grew stronger. Robert and Lily thrived in the loving environment Kurt and Emily provided. Mr. Mayo continued to visit, sharing his wisdom and becoming a cherished grandfather figure to the children. Mr. Chinland remained a steadfast presence, fulfilling his promise to Jolie by being there for Robert. Nick, serving his sentence, faded into the background of their lives. The scars he left behind were healing, replaced by the bonds of love and support that held their family together. Kurt never forgot Jolie's sacrifices and made sure that Robert grew up knowing how much his mother loved him. In the end, it was the love and strength of their family that triumphed over the darkness of the past. They honored Jolie's memory every day, living lives filled with joy, compassion, and the unbreakable bonds of family. And in this way, Jolie's legacy lived on, guiding and protecting them, just as she had always wished. Thank you for joining us today and diving into these enlightening and spiritually uplifting messages. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights to enrich your life. What have you learned from today's video? We would love to hear your thoughts. Please comment below with one thing you've learned and will bring into practice in your life. If you like this video, please leave your comment below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring content. Your support means the world to us, and we look forward to sharing more of God's love and guidance with you. Until next time, stay blessed and keep shining your light.